For a while now, I've had this concept in my head about a laptop that's a secondary computer, one that if lost, damaged, or stolen, wouldn't sorely be missed. And I'd like to call this the knockaround laptop. The ideal knockaround laptop should above all else be inexpensive, under about $300 and probably closer to $200. It should be small and portable, no larger than 13 inches, and for me personally, it needs to run macOS. So I decided to do the most questionable thing and pack two knockaround laptops to compare them on my trip to Europe. My tiny MacBook 12-inch 2017 and another laptop. This isn't any ordinary laptop. This is the finest Intel era MacBook. I assume pretty much all my viewers are familiar with these laptops, but let's do the obligatory rundown. In 2012, Apple redesigned the MacBook Pro to its first Retina-designed Mac, marking it as Apple's third product line to get the Retina treatment, the first being the iPhone 4 back in 2010, and then the second being the iPad in 2012. The Retina Macs marked a departure from Apple's previous MacBook Pros as it featured a new chassis that saved off quite a bit of weight, a half kilogram or 1.2 pounds off, and nearly a quarter inch of thickness or 6 millimeters. Then somehow they packed in an amazing new high-resolution display with its 13-inch model, packing in the same amount of pixels as the famed Apple 30-inch Cinema display at 2560 by 1600. Then the 15-inch model packed in a mind-boggling 2880 by 1800 resolution. It was an impressive display then, and it is still today. The new thinness and weight had to come from somewhere, so Apple sacrificed the optical bay, ditched FireWire 800 and Ethernet, and moved away from hard drives to SSDs. It also switched to soldered down RAM. Also, I should point out that the SSDs were never intended to be user serviceable, and the batteries were more difficult to replace. Apple did manage to keep the SD card slot intact and the two USB ports, and also added a second Thunderbolt port and HDMI. The earliest MacBook Pro Retinas were just a bit underpowered to drive those stunning new displays. However, by 2015, these machines had hit their stride thanks to the advances in speed from the 5th generation Intel iSeries chipset, Thunderbolt 2, faster SSDs and GPUs, and Wi-Fi. The end result is one of the most loved Macs Apple has ever made, especially those 15-inch versions with the dedicated GPUs in addition to the Intel Iris integrated GPU. I can personally speak firsthand as I had one of these computers provided to me by work. I of course remember it very fondly, especially after upgrading to the MacBook Pro 15-inch 2017, which I was much less a fan of. This particular configuration I have is a 13-inch customized with 16GB of RAM and a 3.1 GHz i7, making it the highest end RAM CPU combo for this form factor. Also, I feel like I should point out that the 13-inch only has a dual-core i7, whereas the full-size 15-inch has a quad-core i7. Before this trip, I hadn't touched one of these computers in years, and I kind of figured I had some rose-tinted glasses for it. But the keyboard still feels great, the display is fantastic, and is surprisingly fast, or at least perfectly capable of loading modern web experiences and running modern applications. Compared to my MacBook 2017, a computer that's 2 years newer, it feels so incredibly speedy. Geekbench 6 does not tell the full story here, and rather than just run a battery of benchmarks, I devised something that I think they'll drive home the insane performance difference. Also for fun, I included my 11-inch 2015 MacBook Air. Here, I'm going to throw in a modern machine, the M1 Air, just to drive home what a difference in performance we're looking at. The problem with benchmarks alone is it doesn't tell the whole story for the MacBook 2017. If we do a browser benchmark, there's not a lot of difference, but check this out. Let's load youtube.com. The benchmarks just don't reveal how laggy the 2017 can be. The MacBook Pro 2015 is just way more pleasant to use on a day-to-day basis. Both computers' histories were cleared for this test, and these are private tabs. While this is not a scientific test, this is indicative of my real-world experience using both these computers. I think this simple test illustrates why this computer failed. I made a video about this oddity of a computer and I recommend it to you if you're interested. The MacBook 2017's performance is bad enough that it hinders the usability of this computer, whereas the MacBook Pro 2015, even 8 years later, feels not just acceptable, but dare I say, fast, especially if you're willing to go that extra mile and drop in a modern low-latency NVMe drive. Speaking of SSDs, this is the one upgradable component in this computer. The MacBook Pro 2015s were the last user-serviceable SSDs found in a MacBook Pro. This comes with a bit of an asterisk because Apple pulled its usual anti-repair shenanigans by using a non-standard NGFF key instead of the more popular M2 format used by basically every other NVMe SSD. Fortunately, this is easily remedied by buying a very inexpensive adapter that converts Apple's proprietary NGFF key to M2, which allows you to use off-the-shelf NVMEs rather than overpaying for slower OEM or third-party offerings. As of recording this video, 2TB drives are now falling below $100, making it an inexpensive upgrade for a component that has a finite shelf life. This feature added to the mystique of these machines, especially being followed up by an objectively bad redesign, as the Touchbar Macs had inferior keyboards prone to failure, a gimmicky touch bar that was often buggy, and removed popular features like HDMI, SD card slots, USB-A, and MagSafe. The thinner design also came at the cost of thermals. I guess what I'm trying to say is the 2015 MacBook Pros were more desirable to many users than Apple's follow-up laptops, all the way up until the Apple Silicon MacBook Pros released in 2021. I do have to mention the 2019 16-inch MacBook Pro was a step in the right direction. It's easy for me to remember why these computers were such a big deal because when packing, I didn't need to remember a dongle for HDMI or worry about an SD card reader. This computer has everything I realistically need for travel. Well, almost. When traveling with my Apple Silicon MacBook Pros or my MacBook 2017, I can just take a singular Ugreen GAN charger, and it covers everything like charging 2 laptops at once, or all my USB needs like charging my AirPod Pros, iPhone, and Apple Watch. Instead, when traveling with the 2015 MacBook Pro, I have to pack a dedicated charger just for this computer, and that feels extremely dated. Also, this computer weighs 3.5 pounds, which isn't extremely heavy, but it feels a bit meaty. But to be fair to this computer, my 14-inch M1 Max weighs the same. Another thing that immediately dates this computer is the size of the bezels. They're not egregious like the 11-inch MacBook, but they're not small. Another component that hasn't stood the test of time are the speakers. They are best described charitably as serviceable, whereas the modern MacBook Pro speakers are actually kind of good. That said, some things have aged very well on this Mac, like its keyboard, which remains one of the better keyboards ever to appear on a laptop. Anyone who used one of these keyboards from this era probably remembers them fondly. I actually know some people who prefer the feel of this keyboard over the modern MacBooks. As someone who absolutely loves low-travel, non-mechanical keyboards, both are fantastic in their own right. The 2015 keyboard has a softer, less aggressive feel to the keyboard, versus the crisp clickiness of the Apple Silicon MacBook Pros. It's a toss-up as I find myself enjoying each keyboard. Another random thing that I kind of prefer is the slightly smaller trackpad. Palm input rejection is fantastic on modern MacBooks, so it's not a big deal. If there is one singular technology that Apple seems to have absolutely dialed in, it's the trackpad. I have never used a PC that has anything near as polished as Apple's trackpads for accuracy, feel, and gestures. If there's another brand of laptop in 2023 that offers a trackpad as good as the 2015 MacBook Pro, I have not used it. Another thing that's aged very well on this computer is the display. It might not be high refresh rate or HDR or wide color gamut like P3, but it's ultra crisp, sports very wide viewing angles, and its backlighting is fairly uniform. Check this out, when viewing from off-axis, it has a little bit less color shift than the Apple Silicon ProMotion displays. While editing this video, I felt like it was only fair to point out that the modern MacBook's displays are considerably brighter. Like I previously said, the bezels are a bit large, but it's a remarkably better display than many sold today. Judging this computer aesthetically might seem, I guess a bit pedestrian. It's far from ugly, but by the time this particular computer was manufactured, Apple's unibody design was already 7 years in. But that's because this design just works. I'm positive in 20 years when someone thinks of a computer from the 2010s, this is going to be the archetype, an aluminum body computer sporting black keys. Apple's design language is so successful that aluminum has become the modern beige. However, such an effortless, timeless look, I wonder if we'll ever see a departure from this design until the technology necessitates a new design. To use an analogy, it's the equivalent of marble counters and wide plank oak floors. It just looks right. Of course, there's been some minor updates to the unibody look in the Apple Silicon era with the black key bib, but its DNA is rooted in the exact same place as the 2015 MacBook Pro. It might seem boring, but say, like a KitchenAid mixer, I dare you to find a more timeless look for this device. On the exterior, we have the famed glowing white Apple logo, which remains to date the best use of any glowy light ever on a computer. People still lament its removal, and I'm kinda surprised Apple hasn't figured out a way to bring it back because it was so iconic. Personally though, I prefer not having a glowing badge as I don't need to be a mini billboard for Apple, but I do have to concede it really does look cool. Okay, I think you get it, I like this computer. As a knock-around laptop, the MacBook Pro 13-inch is probably the best buy right now in the Apple universe. Perhaps this is because I'm a big nerd, but I always like to have a computer with me when I travel, but I always don't want to worry about carting around an expensive M1 Max. Now, I assume most normal people don't want or need a knock-around laptop and use a tablet or phone, but I still prefer a keyboard and mouse over touch interfaces, and I like desktop applications. And yes, there is a tragic irony that my iPhone 14 Pro has a beefier CPU and GPU than this laptop. The MacBook Pro 2015 is fast enough to still be useful and can easily be used with OpenCore Legacy Patcher to install the latest OS, and it's also small enough that it can be brought on a plane and light enough that it's not a burden. It also packs in most of the ports you'd probably realistically need for a vacation. As someone with a love of petite laptops, I've tried making a go of an 11-inch MacBook Air, but the screen was too awful. Then I've already covered why I don't like my MacBook 12-inch because of the horrible performance. I wish the 13-inch MacBook Pro was lighter, but it's not compromised. As a knock-around MacBook, this is probably the computer to get until Apple drops Intel support for good. You can pick up the lower-end configs for under $250, and it's only bound to get cheaper. It's fast enough to play retro games when you're stuck on a 12-hour flight, or edit photos in Pixelmator Pro, and you could still do light video editing in a pinch. Because this Mac has upgradable storage, you could just buy a cheap SSD and load it up with like media, games, or like use it as a place to dump SD cards. It could even function as a full-fledged backup Mac with the same suite of applications you use on your main rig. I could say more about the lack of removable storage on modern Macs, but I think this is a good place to end this video. If you enjoyed this video, I recommend checking out my video essay on the MacBook 12-inch. Or go to my Patreon, there's free stuff for people that aren't even supporting me, so check it out.